West Virginia has moved on from Neal Brown, and the question now becomes who's the next head coach of the West Virginia football program? And in this video, I'm going to provide you with 25 candidates that could potentially be the next head man at WVU in 2025. Let's get into it. What's going on, Mountaineer Nation? Obviously, it has happened. West Virginia has fired Neal Brown. The coaching search is already underway, as Ren Baker has announced. So it's time to talk candidates, as I promised you guys all along the way. Once it was official, I would come out with a list of about 25 candidates, and I was able to come up with exactly 25. So it's perfect. It's going to be the 2025 head coach. So, hey, 25 candidates for 2025, and we're going to get into that list right away. I've got it separated into 3 different categories. I've got coaches with Power 5 experience, coaches without Power 5 experience, and then a list of a few coordinators as well that I believe could be candidates. We'll run through all 25 of those names and talk a little bit about those guys and why they are candidates and why maybe you should like them or maybe not like them, depending on how I feel. But still, would always love to hear your all thoughts. Throw them in the comments on any other candidates you may like or your feelings on any of the ones that I name. And of course, if you would, just do me a favor, hit that like button. That helps a ton with the YouTube algorithm. And be sure, subscribe here. We'll be covering this coaching search throughout its entirety here on the Country Roads webcast. Plus, we always provide recruiting coverage, transfer portal coverage, all kinds of good stuff here if you're a WVU football fan. And if you want to support us monthly, you can do that as well by becoming a channel member, and you'll get WVU football game rewatch commentaries, film reviews for the football games, player grades after them, snap counts, depth chart projections, all kinds of good stuff. So we'd appreciate that. But if you want to support us fast, easy, and free, hit that like button and subscribe here to the channel. Let's get into the list. All right, so personally, the way I'm feeling about this coaching search leading off, and always, of course, subject to change, and I think if Neal Brown's tenure at WVU proved it to us anything, it's that these coaching hirings are a crapshoot because it was praised as a home run. We all thought it was going to be successful, and here we are 6 years later, back doing it over because it didn't work out. So I think for me, that kind of soared me a little bit on group of 5 coaches. And then, of course, Dana's tenure, West Virginia, a little bit more successful winning percentage-wise and things like that, but still never reached a Big 12 title game. So that kind of sours me a little bit on coordinators. But I think West Virginia will look both those routes, and we'll still talk those. But personally, what I'm hoping to see with this hire, maybe more than anything, is West Virginia maybe get a coach that has some Power 5 experience. Power 4, I guess now, whatever you want to call it, Power Conference experience. And there actually are some coordinators that have that experience. Funny enough, we'll talk about when we get there as well. But let's lead it off then with that category here, the head coaches with Power Conference experience. And obviously the 2 big elephants in the room that you got to talk about, I think right now, the 2 names that are popping up at the forefront of the searches that are probably going to be indeed candidates, 2 guys with West Virginia ties, Jimbo Fisher, currently, a free agent, I guess you could say, not coaching anywhere currently after being let go from Texas A&M. But if you look at his career record here, 128-48 overall, 8-2 in bowls, has been in CFP once, is 0-1 there. The big thing that you look at with him, that's the biggest selling point, obviously, is the national championship ring. Came back in 2013. I'm not the biggest Jimbo fan. I understand the West Virginia ties, but I think at Texas A&M, you had all the money in the world. You had the number 1 recruiting class, and you couldn't make it work when you had more, you did less. And at West Virginia, you have to do more with less, he did less with more at Texas A&M, and he has to do more with less at WVU. Obviously, you guys know what I mean there. And so that kind of worries me. Plus, I'm not a big fan of his offense, but, you could convince me on this hire if you told me he was going to hire a young up-and-coming offensive coordinator to help him, run this offense and help him in today's day and age, because, he wasn't successful as much at Texas A&M as he was back at Florida State, which was, a decade ago now. So, but Jimbo Fisher, probably a candidate you need to look at. And then let's talk Rich Rod. I know a lot of the fan base still holds a grudge. I think it's gone away for a good percentage. He's made appearances on 3 guys, different WVU podcasts, and talked. And I think it's kind of mended the fences a little bit there, but we'll see if that, bridge can be built back for him to ever return back to WVU, because I think if it's ever going to happen, it would be in this time right now because of a few reasons. Obviously, for one, West Virginia, monetarily can't really afford to pay, anyone a ton, and him coming up from a group of 5 team right now would allow West Virginia to be able to pay him a little bit more than what he's making and not have to pay him a ton. So it would work out money-wise, and, this is probably just the last opportunity for it to happen because of where he's at in his career right now as well. But I think you look at Jacksonville State, obviously came up, he brought them up from the lower level, brought them up to the FBS level here, to Division One, whatever you want to call it, and now has them, competing for a conference title right there already in his second season. And you look at his career record as a head coach: 189 and 129. Obviously, two-time Big East Coach of the Year. When he was at Arizona, he won Pac-12 Coach of the Year. And I think the reason I prefer a Rich Rod to a Jimbo is Rich Rod's kind of shown that he can do it in today's day and age. Obviously, with being at Jacksonville State now, where he's currently 26-10 in his time there, and that's in the NIL era, the transfer portal era. He's shown that he can do that, but he was in it prior to that as well as the offensive coordinator at Ole Miss, still showing that his offense can get it done. And you look at his offense at Jacksonville State, and no further proof than that. His quarterback has 2,000 passing yards and 1,100 rushing yards, guys. Combined for 11 touchdowns passing, 13 touchdowns rushing. His running back, I believe, is the conference player of the year. He has 1,400 rushing yards, so over 3,000 rushing yards as a team, and between those two, they have over 1,000. He has two 1,000-yard rushers, one with near 1,500. So his offense still works in today's game even as well. So Rich Rod's definitely going to be a candidate. Obviously, he's shown that he can do it here in the past. And obviously the Power 4 experience is important. And then we have another one that I think is probably going to be mentioned in a lot of coaching searches just because of how young he was when he got out of it. He's been an ESPN analyst now, so I guess you'd call him another free agent. And that's Dan Mullen, obviously most recently the coach there at Florida. As a head coach, he has a record of 103-61, 7-3 in bowl games, 2014 SEC Coach of the Year. Like, his name's going to pop up, and I think the interesting aspect of this one that I didn't really realize is that he's actually from Pennsylvania, Drexel, Pennsylvania, and it's only about 300 miles from Morgantown, so maybe that makes this one a little bit more interesting and intriguing than I thought it could be previously. And like I said, with me really wanting to coach with Power 4 experience, West Virginia could do a lot worse than Dan Mullen, so watch out for his name popping up. And then the other one that I think not a lot of people maybe realize has, the Power Conference experience, or they forget that he does anyway, and he has ties to Ren Baker, and you've heard his name pop up previously probably already, and that, of course, is UNLV head coach Barry Odom. He's currently 19-7 in his time at UNLV as a head coach overall, 44-32. His Power 4 experience came when he was the head coach at Missouri there from 2016 to 2019. West Virginia actually played him there in 2016. I believe that may have been his first game or one of his early games at Missouri. West Virginia beat him there. Not the best success at Missouri, but obviously the SEC difficult. You could say the same for Jimbo Fisher, who we talked about at Texas A&M. But last year, obviously, was the Mountain West Coach of the Year, and this year having a great season as well at UNLV. That go-go offense is special. Brendan Marion helps cultivate that as their offensive coordinator. He's going to be a candidate for jobs as well. But I think the fact that the ties between Barry Odom and Ren Baker, having previously, ran into each other at the time at Missouri, definitely makes him a candidate for this job. So watch out for Barry Odom. And those are the four that I have on the list as far as head coaches with Power 4 experience. Like I said, there are some coordinators that have Power experience. We'll talk about those momentarily. But let's talk about other sitting head coaches that do not have the Power experience. You're talking group of 5 guys here that may be candidates for this job. We have Jason Candle, the head coach of Toledo. He's been a hot name for a lot of coaching searches recently. 72-40 overall record as a head coach there at Toledo, and has kind of revived that program to where they've had successful seasons repetitively over the past few years. When he took over there and on here through now, you look at his records: 9-4 16, 11-3 after that, then 7-6, 6-6. Then back to 7-6. Then since then 9-5, 11-3, 7-5. So no losing seasons, despite being a program that's never been that successful. 2 MAC championships and 2-time MAC Coach of the Year there. So Jason Candle, a candidate that's going to be up to talk about there, the head coach of Toledo. Then you have John Sumrall, who's currently the head coach of Tulane. Obviously going to be a hot candidate, and I think a lot of people have been talking about him potentially being one of the reasons for Neal Brown's success at Troy during his time there was because of John Sumrall playing a part in that. And of course, you've seen John Sumrall go on to have success since then, first at Troy and then moving on to Tulane, who's been successful this year as well, has them with 9 wins, 9-3 at Tulane after going 12-2 there at Troy, and 11-2 in his 2 seasons there. So it's been very successful. Like 2 Sun Belt championships, Sun Belt Coach of the Year in 2022. But I think the thing that will probably make West Virginia steer away from this one, in my opinion, is the ties to Neal Brown. You obviously don't want something that probably is that close to the situation you're just now getting away from. But John Sumrall is going to be a candidate for a lot of jobs. I wouldn't be surprised if his name pops up for WVU. And then this one's interesting. Anthony Becht. No, obviously, Power 4 experience at the college level, but he has some head coaching experience now, having been the head coach of the St. Louis Battlehawks in the XFL, USFL. I think this one's probably a long shot that he would, be reached out to, but you never know. And he has had success there. They won the XFL championship or whatever there with the Battlehawks, and he has been in coaching. If nothing else, maybe he's a guy that they could reach out to for a potential staff position in the future. But you do have the added bonus of maybe him wanting to call out to Rocco Beck to bring him along for the ride if you did reach out to him. But interesting name to throw in there, of course, to go with our 25 candidates as we continue through the ones without Power 5 experience. And one of my favorites here in this category of coaches without the power experience is one in Jamie Chadwell, because I think when you talk about, Rich Rod and kind of how he came up, he had that innovative offense, was a little bit different, kind of unique, and really led to wins, and people really couldn't diagnose it and stop it. And I think you could say the same for Jamie Chadwell thus far. I mean, currently he's had a great coaching career both at Coastal Carolina and then at Liberty. 2 seasons now at Liberty, has a record of 21-4. We know the great success he had at Coastal Carolina prior to that. His head coaching record overall, 119-61. Has the CUSA championship, has the Sun Belt championship, Coach of the Year in college football in 2020 by multiple different services there. Eddie Robinson, Home Depot, Walter Camp, and AP. Sunbelt Coach of the Year that year as well. CUSA Coach of the Year last year, and G5 Coach of the Year there, the Paul Bear Bryant Award. So I think Jamie Chadwell is an interesting one. That's one of my favorite ones if you're looking at guys without power experience. That this is one that I may still be excited about, even though I'm kind of hoping for a guy that has the power conference experience, because he has an offense that I think is unique enough, and we've shown that at West Virginia you kind of need that, something that's different, that's true to you, that you can mold around your system, kind of like what Rich Rod did. And I think Jamie Chadwell could do something similar, and I like him a lot. So you have him. And then we have Bob Chesney, the current head coach of James Madison, to talk about as well. Obviously, the previous James Madison head coach, Kurt Signetti, I'm going to go ahead and spoil it. His name's not on this list. Obviously, you would have seen it pop up there in head coaches with power experience. And that's just because I think West Virginia missed the boat on him. They're a year or two late. He just signed that contract extension in Indiana, and he's going to be making like $8 million a year. I don't think West Virginia can afford to pay that type of money. So that's why you won't see him on this list. But Bob Chesney, current head coach of James Madison, 8-4 there this year, did a good job. But before that, he was at Holy Cross for a good time and a couple places before then, and a record of 119-50 as a head coach. Pretty impressive from the D2 level now up to the FBS level here at James Madison. Has racked up a ton of awards there, of course, in the D2 level, and a bunch of championships. So Bob Chesney is a Group of 5 guy to keep an eye on. And then here's an interesting one that's not from the Group of 5 level, but from the FCS level, and Jimmy Rogers, current head coach of South Dakota State. We've seen these FCS coaches move up time and time again and have success. Look no further than right in the Big 12 Conference at Kansas State with Chris Kleiman, who brought up a North Dakota State coach in him, and he's been having success there at Kansas State. And South Dakota State is another program there that has great success at the FCS level, and Jimmy Rogers has been having great success there. 25-2 record as the head coach there at South Dakota State, and that's something you can look to maybe as an FCS coach, would be a different route to go, but Jimmy Rogers could be a candidate if West Virginia chooses to go that route. And we've talked about, some retired coaches with Power 5 experience, but how about one that doesn't have experience but was very successful in Bill Clark? Previously was the UAB head coach before retiring, really revived the UAB football program. If you guys don't remember, they had decided to cancel football, do away with it. They bring it back literally from the dead, and Bill Clark has success with that program prior to retiring there. Before that, he was a very successful high school coach in Alabama, and then was the coach at Jacksonville State. A 60-30 record as a college football coach, 106-11 record in high school. And Bill Clark's been mentioned on some coaching hot lists, so that's a candidate to watch out for that's currently not coaching anywhere. Another free agent candidate, but we're talking about one here in the no Power 5 experience pool. And another coach there is Ryan Silverfield of Memphis. Memphis obviously had success since he's been there, 41-21 record there. And, these Group of 5 coaches, and this is true here for Silverfield as well, most of these guys are guys that you can afford. So that's why, obviously, you're seeing more names in these lists here and more names in the coordinator list, because those are kind of the main guys West Virginia can't afford. And the ones that I named with Power 5 experience are potential guys that I think West Virginia actually could afford as well. I'm trying to keep this list as realistic as possible. That's why I didn't put Cignetti on it, and no Nick Saban either. But like I said, overall 41-21 record, pretty impressive for Ryan Silverfield since taking over as the head coach of Memphis after he served there as an assistant for quite some time. And then, of course, you can't mention group of five coaches right now and not talk about Spencer Danielson at Boise State, with Boise State looking like they're going to go to the college football playoff and maybe have a chance of even still in the Big 12's, first round bye, and being a group of five team that gets that first round bye. 2 years at Boise State, and he's lost 2 games total. The one game that he's lost this season was to arguably the best team in the country in Oregon. He was a longtime assistant there at Boise State, gets promoted, and has done a great job. I know it's a small sample size, only 2 years there, but you gotta love what he's done with the 14-2 record. So I think he's got to be a candidate from that pool. And then Tyson Helton here, 48-30 record as a coach at Western Kentucky. Western Kentucky actually just beat a Rich Rod's Jacksonville State team on Saturday there in the CUSA conference. So he has had success there. CUSA East Division Championship in 2021 and was the coach of the year in that conference in 2019. He also was, a very successful coordinator with multiple stops. Tennessee and USC was really successful with both of those offenses, molding them. So, that's something to watch out for there. Another candidate from that pool, which then, of course, brings us up to one more final candidate from the this pool, and then we will get into the coordinators as we continue to move through our top 25 candidates to potentially replace Neal Brown in 2025. Appreciate you guys sticking with me here. I think this is a long list, but a good list. And I think we got to talk Jeff Monken. I know this one's a little bit more outside the box, obviously, because he's at Army, and before that he was at Georgia Southern, or so he's a triple option guy. But from reports that people have always talked about by him, he's not necessarily married to running the triple option if he was to ever get a Power 5 job, and he's always floated as a candidate because he's been so successful as a head coach. 118-72 overall. He's 4-1 in bowl games, and he's 80-56 since his time at Army. And obviously, you've seen the success that Army has had this year. Was multiple Coach of the Year awards, one in 2018, one in 2021. And like I said, his name's always floated around, so I think you got to put him here as well. So Jeff Monken rounds out the head coaches without Power 5 experience list, or Power 4, I guess I should say now. So, kind of the group of 5 candidates there. Now let's talk about coordinators that West Virginia may target here to round out our top 25 candidates for the Mountaineers here. And I think that one of them here that we got to lead off with is Andy Kotelnicki. And Andy Kotelnicki's name is definitely at the top probably of the coordinator pool list right now, because just a little bit before I started recording this video tonight, I'm recording this December 1st, later that night, the day that Neal Brown is announced as being fired, actually. And just prior to that, let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys so you guys can see this as well. Because there are already reports that Andy Kotelnicki may have interest in the job and may be interviewing. This courtesy of our friends over at WVSportsNow.com. Mike Osty was the one to break this. WVU football expected to interview Penn State offensive coordinator Andy Kotelnicki. Of course, WV Sports learned through a source that he's a candidate to take over for the Mountaineers, confirmed shortly to WVSN after the program announced the firing of Neal Brown. Kotelnicki 43 days away from coaching the Big Ten championship game currently. Penn State 11-1, and the improved offense is a big reason why a lot of people think they're in that Big Ten championship game. 33.3 points per game, and of course has Big 12 experience from his time at Kansas, where he was a big part of that rebuild with Lance Leipold. So when we mentioned him, I wanted to share that as well. But obviously no record as a head coach, but his success as an offensive coordinator unparalleled. I think a lot of people would name him as, arguably the top, or if not one of the top offensive coordinators in all of college football. So West Virginia could do a lot worse than Kotelnicki if you're going coordinator, and it would be one that would definitely excite me because of the potential of what it would mean for West Virginia's offense. So you got to lead it off with Andy Kotelnicki right now, I think, the current offensive coordinator at Penn State. And then you have Tony Gibson, who's obviously going to pop up because the West Virginia ties. His name was mentioned even briefly before West Virginia hired Neal Brown, current defensive coordinator at NC State. I think his name would have been hotter a couple of years ago or last year, but NC State not that successful this season, and a defense at times was a reason why. And I think maybe West Virginia may not want to go back to that, era, because I think when you look at the Neal Brown era and the Dana Holgorsen era, one thing that was consistent was defensive struggles at times, and Tony Gibson's name, unfortunately, is tied into that, although I think the defense improved when he took over during Dana's tenure. I don't know if West Virginia will target him necessarily, but you got to mention his name because of the ties. I think a much more popular candidate is Glenn Schumann, the defensive coordinator at Georgia, and he's probably going to be a candidate that pops up for a lot of jobs. Before that, he had spent time at Alabama, and then obviously went with Kirby Smart when Kirby Smart got the job at Georgia. Was one of his first hires as a linebacker coach, then to co-DC, then to full-time DC in 2022. And obviously, the Georgia's defensive success speaks for itself. So a good coordinator candidate would be Glenn Schumann if you're looking to hire a defensive guy, which West Virginia could choose to do. I think the two things you're going to probably expect is West Virginia probably stay away from kind of the air raid system, as it didn't work out with Dana or Neal Brown. I know Neal Brown tried to run the ball more in recent years, but he is kind of from that same tree. And maybe, if not someone that's defensive minded, maybe someone that has a good defensive coordinator tied to them that they know would be successful, that they've had success with. So Glenn Schumann, a candidate there if you're talking defense. But another candidate that's an offensive coordinator, has ties to West Virginia, obviously, that's been mentioned in some lists, is Shannon Dawson, currently the offensive coordinator of Miami, who obviously had great success on offense this year. Cam Ward been mentioned as a Heisman candidate throughout the season. Miami was up in the rankings. I know they got upset last week of the season, going to keep them out of the ACC title game. Maybe they have a chance to be an at-large playoff team. But he also had prolific offenses when he was the offensive coordinator at WVU early in Dana Holgerson's tenure there from 2011 to 2014. He had multiple stops after that: Kentucky, Southern Miss, Houston, and then, of course, now successful at Miami for the past 2 seasons where he's been the offensive coordinator. And I think because of the West Virginia ties, you got to mention it. But I think kind of similar to what I said with John Summerall, because his ties to Dana, I don't think it would be someone West Virginia would potentially have at the top of their list. But you got to mention him here when you're talking candidates. And then some of my favorite candidates here towards the end of this list, I think the remainder of these are all offensive coordinators that I have. One here being Garrett Riley, the current offensive coordinator of Clemson. Obviously, Clemson has been pretty successful since he went there, particularly this year in his second season. You've seen some big leaps for Cade Klubnik, the Clemson quarterback there. But obviously, what really stands out was his time at SMU and then his year at TCU when he was the orchestrator of that offense, that great year that TCU had with Max Duggan, and he really had an amazing offense, one of the top in the country. TCU goes to play not only in the college football playoff but for the national championship, and then he takes the job at Clemson. So obviously the next step for him is to probably be a head coach. So Garrett Riley is a candidate. You got a name. We were talking coordinators, and then I mentioned, earlier, there are some coordinators that have power experience, and one of those is right here. I think this is actually the only one. The other one actually doesn't have power experience, but he has some high-level experience. We'll talk about that momentarily. But that's Chip Kelly. And it's a name I haven't heard brought up a ton. I think a lot of people maybe think West Virginia couldn't afford him. But, and also he went from being a head coach to being an offensive coordinator. So maybe people are wondering if he wants to be a head coach again. But obviously you can't question the success at Oregon. Mixed success in the NFL, UCLA, not the best, but, he's proven that he can do it in college. He's proven he can field great offenses, obviously doing another great offense this year as the offensive coordinator of Ohio State. 81-41 record as a college coach, much better than his NFL record. 3 Pac-12 championships, multiple Coach of the Year awards. So you have that going for you. And he's only making $2 million at Ohio State, contrary to popular belief. So West Virginia could give him a salary upgrade and bring him in as a head coach. So I think he is a candidate that's flying a little bit under the radar that I think maybe could be mentioned with the 4 that I mentioned earlier as far as guys with power experience. But he's currently a coordinator, so he goes here with the coordinator candidates. But Chip Kelly, maybe one to watch. And then, of course, Will Stein at Oregon is going to be a name that's a hot commodity in coaching searches moving forward. Oregon, one of the top offenses the past 2 years. Obviously, this year, maybe arguably the best team in college football. Previously, before that, he was at UTSA. Successful offenses there. And his, what he's done at Oregon this year speaks for itself. So you got to bring up Will Stein. And then Jake Spavital. Kind of similar to what we talked about with Shannon Dawson. I think Jake Spavital's obviously, had one stint as a head coach there from Texas State for about 3 or 4 seasons, I think. And then he went to be the OC at Cal before coming over to Baylor. And we've seen what Baylor did this season. They went from 2-4 to 8-4. A lot of that due to the offensive success they found. And when they switched to Robertson at quarterback, and maybe they kind of got acclimated to Spavital's system, which has been successful. Let's not forget the 2 years that he was here at WVU, 17 and 18, which were his second stint at WVU when he was actually calling the plays. They were some of our most explosive offenses that we had in the Dana era, and also kind of the closest that we got to a Big 12 championship. So his ties to West Virginia, if you're talking coordinator candidates, if you're bringing up Shannon Dawson, you got to bring up Jake Spavital as well, although I don't think he's high on the list. And then a guy with Big 12 experience that should be familiar to Mountaineers is Colin Klein. Obviously, we faced him in our early years in the Big 12. Great quarterback at Kansas State. State, and then went on to be a coach there as an offensive coordinator for a few seasons ago before going to Texas A&M this year. And we've seen Texas A&M be successful in their time with Mike Elko and with Colin Klein calling the plays there offensively. And obviously the next step for him is to maybe be a coach somewhere. So could be a candidate that's coordinator you could mention is Colin Klein, the former Kansas State quarterback. And the last one to round it out here, our 25th candidate, as we named 25 candidates for WVU in 2025. And the video is nearing 25 minutes as well. So how fitting. Apologies for the length, but wanted to be, kind of thorough with talking about these guys. And rounding out the list is one that's very interesting to me, and I haven't seen mentioned anywhere else, I don't think yet, but it's Eric Bieniemy. And Eric Bieniemy obviously was a hot name in NFL coaching circles for a long time, in coaching searches that were popping up because of his time with the Kansas City Chiefs as a coordinator there for many years. I think it was 13 to 17, he was like their, running backs coach, according to Wikipedia, and then their offensive coordinator from 18 to 22. That success was unparalleled. Went to the Commanders for a year, and then came to UCLA to be assistant head coach with Deshaun Foster this year, but is the only offensive coordinator there at UCLA. Now, it doesn't show his salary here, so I don't know 100% if West Virginia could afford him. That could be the only thing in question. But, I mentioned wanting a guy that has, power conference experience, which would be great. But a guy with NFL experience could be good as well. And now, he has more experience at the college level. He's obviously had some in his previous time. He started his career at Colorado and UCLA before then, but now he has experience in today's game in the NIL era and the transfer portal era. So check that box off as well. So I think this is an interesting candidate to name, is Eric Bieniemy, currently the offensive coordinator at UCLA. As we round out the list there it is, guys. Head coaches with power experience, head coaches without power experience, and coordinator candidates to round out 25 candidates to potentially be WVU's coach in 2025. Like I said, throw your thoughts in the comments. Always appreciate those interactions as we continue to try and grow the CRW community throughout Mountaineer Nation, whether it be on any of these names on the list or a name that I didn't name here that you think could be a really good candidate for the Mountaineers. And as I said, we'll continue to cover the coaching search here on the Country Roads webcast. So follow us here and subscribe if you haven't already. We really appreciate you. Just hit that thumbs up button before you head out. That helps with the YouTube algorithm as well. As always, I'm Jordan Cruz, and until next time, let's go Mountaineers.